Hello, so thank you, Chris. So I'm an astrologer, as some of you might know, and I've absolutely loved talking at Aquarius 7, so I decided it would be great to actually step in and do the hosting as well. And I'm really excited actually tonight to introduce Liz Hathway, um, who's going to be talking about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and looking at that in the context of the Neptune discovery chart, which I did look at earlier this evening, and I'm now really excited to see hear what she has to say. So Liz says that Saturn and Neptune will be conjunct on the Aries point of fresh cycle. A brave new world appears on the horizon at that moment. And how are we to imagine this great collective swell? So what might an exploration of the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Aquarius in Neptune's discovery chart have to tell us about our relationship to the real? So in this talk, Liz is going to trace an outline of the future through the lens of the past. And Liz is a qualified Horary astrologer. She has an MA in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology, and also the diploma from the Faculty of Astrological Studies. Now tutors at the Hermetische Kosmos, based in Den Bosch in the Netherlands, and has been lecturing on mundane astrology since 2004. So Liz is originally from South Wales and is currently living and working in the Netherlands. So welcome, Liz. Hi.
Thank you, Alison, for that lovely introduction. I would just say, though, I'm Hathway, not Hathaway. That's a common mistake.
Oh, Hathway. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm not Hathaway, but it's okay.
Yes.
This happens a lot.
Sorry.
So, yeah, thank you for inviting me. And I think without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. So, yeah, let's kick it off and let's get started. So, yeah, the name of the talk, as you can see, it's Saturn conjunct Neptune, dreaming a new real, because we know these two planets, Saturn and Neptune, are in many ways each other's opposites, whereas Saturn is very much based in reality. Neptune takes us somewhere else, takes us into a whole different country. And the coming together of these two titans or giants, if you like, we know historically creates a lot of waves. So first, I'd like to give like a little bit of a setting for this conjunction, because actually in terms of the placement of the planets in late Pisces, you know, they're already by antition, they've already been kind of massaging the Aries point for the last year, actually, before they ingressed the sign, certainly for the ingressed Aries. But I think what we're seeing is a really major shift from, you know, decades really, where the emphasis has been, certainly in terms of the big conjunctions, it's been a very big emphasis on Capricorn, particularly. And we've had, you know, the triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto around the time of COVID. But the last Saturn-Neptune was in Capricorn. We've had Uranus-Neptune in Capricorn. So there's been this very big, large focus in a way on, you know, stability, practical, earth, you know, sort of, yeah, same old in many ways. And we're kind of shifting now into this completely new sort of era of fire and air. And it's interesting because, yeah, as you say, I chose this image already when I started prepping this talk. But it seems, as we were talking before we opened the door to everybody to come in, how we've got these huge fires here in France at the moment. You know, this fiery sort of energy, fire and air seems to be, yeah, what we're entering into, certainly. And it has that idea of, in a way, fire to an air to me. It has a sort of ephemeral quality as a moth to a flame. You know, there's something very attractive and also potentially dangerous about these two elements coming together, because, you know, oxygen feeds fire, and without air, fire can't burn. So we have like air, winds, breezes, fanning the flames. Air is thought and communication, passion, fire, action, inspiration. But it also has a sort of intense quality and an unpredictability and an instability and, you know, in explosive situations, drama. You know, it's kind of, it's a whole different sort of energy than earth and water. So, to think about the conjunctions and the movements into fire and air from like a personal point of view, it's kind of, in a way, this shift is quite, I think, quite transformative, and we should be allowing new things through now. This idea of the new real, what is it? Where is this conjunction falling in our own charts? And we shouldn't extinguish, the fire too quickly, because Saturn is of the nature of Saturn to dampen things down and to try and contain. But we can't always control a fire, so that can be highly unpredictable and dangerous. And if we think of this combination now in terms of alchemy, it's that first step in the alchemical process, which is calcination, where the raw material is being heated up, so, making this idea of clearing away the old and making way for the new, for renewal. And I think the conjunction that we're going to see now, Saturn-Neptune, we can also see the crisis side of it. Fire, as I said, it has that quality of unpredictability and danger. But on a personal level, if we fire in our own charts, if there's too much of it, if we're going to be having, a big transit to personal planets now, especially the more difficult transits, we can imagine, there will be some kind of crisis here from fire. And too much of it, we get the kind of burnout or identity crisis. And I think particularly with Saturn-Neptune, we have the idea of loss, and also the Neptunian process of grieving processes. And this can be kind of on a collective level, actually. So it's a strongly purifying combination. And there's certainly with Saturn-Neptune always a sort of Neptunian detachment, and that idea of the old patterns of Saturn being, hollowed out and undermined by Neptune, which creates collapse and, falling away of the old and making way for something new. So yeah, this process is something I've been kind of thinking about. We see it in chemistry, right? When we heat something in an alembic, it changes, water evaporates, metal can become fluid. So Saturn, it's very much the inner life. It's a winter sign. It's that changing from, fluid to a different kind of nature. It freezes over, contracting, standing alone. But Saturn is also about chains and deep patterns of behavior and karma and dharma. Whereas Neptune, it's really as in a dream. This is not real. Fantasy. The sense of drifting away from a conversation, or the loss of normal consciousness, as in dementia. I think dementia is quite Neptunian. It's also that idea of not knowing. Certainty becomes less certainty. The edges become blurred. And that feeling or sense of being lost or without direction is something that, is certainly very present when you're in a really long Neptunian process, because obviously Neptune moves slower than Saturn. So after Saturn has moved on, Neptune's still going to be hanging around there. So yeah, Neptune is, these two planets, as I said, they're kind of, in terms of identity, they have different identities. They want different things. So, and now they're coming together, and the line that divides one from the other becomes, blurred, or, it's less clear. I think one of the things that Liz Green says, I think Liz Green's book on Neptune is my favorite book on Neptune. It's very thoughtful. And one of the things that she says about Neptune is it's like a hall of mirrors. And I think that sense of perception, that sense of where am I, that sense of, moving through a hall of mirrors, what is real, what is unreal. It's that lack of certainty, which Saturn desires above all else, which is kind of called into doubt, really, by the presence of Neptune. So this is a quote here I think is quite interesting, because André Barbeau, the very well-known French mundane astrologer, he died a number of years ago, I think probably 5 years ago now. But in his book in 2016, he kind of points out this conjunction, which is placed at the beginning of Aries. And he says it's in a triangular quartet of planets with a double sextile between Uranus in Gemini and a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. And he says this is the most benefic configuration of the century, of the 21st century. And he said its interplanetary partnership will work for the best in a splendid relaunch of civilization. And given the events that are unfolding as this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we've already got Uranus in Gemini, so it's already there. I think Chris mentioned that we have the kite formation already this evening. So the energy's there, really. It's just not exact yet, but certainly formative. It's happening. And I'm just wondering, it's very difficult at this moment to see this benefic energy that Barbeau is imagining. So I'm kind of wondering if, in a way, we can translate this into this whole AI revolution, which seems to be exploding all around us suddenly in the last year or so. It seems to have it's gone from zero to hero overnight, really. So just to sort of setting the scene a little bit for this talk here, but as you can see, this is just random by the way. It's just it's just happened that I looked at when is this coming quite close into orb. And as you can see, in August, just in a few weeks from now, we kind of quite close into the exact formation that Barbeau is talking about. So we have 6 cycles here. We have Uranus to Neptune, Saturn, Uranus to Pluto, Pluto to Saturn, Neptune, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, of course. So there's kind of 6 cycles coming through here. And the apex of this cycle that we're looking at, of 6 cycles, is Saturn-Neptune, which is a 36-year cycle. But the slower cycle, of course, is Uranus-Pluto, which, this is the first trine between these 2 planets since they were conjunct in the 1960s. And we all know, what that brought about, what a fresh breath of fresh air and how much change and how much so many things, from gay rights to women's rights to civil rights. It was all about freedom. And, as in mundane astrology, when I think it's Nick Campion who does the cycles of the planets, but he talks about this sort of sense of evolutionary pressure and this desire for radical change and freedom, which these 2 planets, when they are, and certainly now we have a harmonious aspect, can bring about. So Neptune is, of course, with Saturn, which Neptune is the power of the imagination, the ability to see something different, to see something new. And, and Saturn, Saturn, is in fall in Aries. So, Saturn is kind of weakened in a way by its position in Aries. So, yeah, it's like, what should our new world actually look like? What is this going to be? By the way, I love the way the Americans kind of come up with names for things. They're calling this configuration the magic triangle. How Neptunian is that? So again, just to sort of set the setting here. So if we look at the first Uranus sextile Pluto following on from the conjunction, that was taking place in 94, 95, 96, because these are kind of aspects that are in orb for a long time. And so 1995, which is kind of the midpoint of it, it actually came out, I was Googling it, and it came up as 1995, the year that changed everything. So Amazon was launched, eBay was launched, Windows 95, Internet Explorer, Alta Vista, Java, JavaScript. We had the first USB stick. So what happened in 1995 is that, there'd been this slow shift and slow move and change, almost imperceptible. It was just going on in the background. And then suddenly, when these 2 planets started to engage with each other, there's a kind of what you could call a tipping point. So I think what we're likely to see is that things that have been kind of almost like developing unseen in the background, that they're going to come up, and we're seeing it already. I think this whole AI revolution, because that's really what it is kind of like almost like a tsunami coming over us now at the moment. But it's been there, but it's now this tipping point, this idea of a tipping point. So I want to change the vibe a little bit now. So this is a painting by Turner, and it's called The Cave of Queen Mab. And this painting was first exhibited in 1846. So it was the year that Neptune was discovered. And Turner is starting to take art in a completely new direction. I think what we see with artists very often is that they are more fine-tuned into what is going on in the collective or behind the surface of things. They can tap into it and, you know, come up with something like this, which is so obviously not real. You know, it's taken us somewhere else. Where's Queen Mab? Lord alone knows. So it's a mixture of Shakespeare with the castle in the background is inspired by Wales, but the country Wales. But there's all these mystical figures and ephemeral. So it's a feeling based as opposed to a reality based image that he is presenting the public at this point in 1846, just as Neptune is coming into our consciousness. So at this time, you know, we're at kind of mid-19th century, we are seeing the rise of rationalism, the rise of scientism. You know, in the mid-19th century, you know, the whole new way of dealing with the world, you know, the empirical way, rational, scientific approach to things. It was starting to seriously undermine traditional ways of being in the world, you know, our religious concepts, changes to society, you know, major breakthroughs in terms of the industrialization processes. There's like a second almost industrial revolution in a way. We've had the Enlightenment thinkers coming through, and science was starting to be seen actually as the key to progress and to truth and social improvement. We were becoming highly scientific. There was an emphasis on reason and logical thinking and human intellect as the source of knowledge. So here underneath, for example, we see Adolf Strecker here, who had created, you know, he broke down, you know, the disease malaria and created a medicine, a cure for it. So, you know, the whole of Africa opened up, you know, sort of the world was just, you know, we were discovering everything. And at this point, just as we're on this road, if you like, towards, you know, what shall we call it? The rise, the steady rise of a certain way of being in the world. Just at this point, Neptune was discovered, and the discovery of Neptune in many ways turned this all upside down. So this is the discovery chart of Neptune. And we can see for a start that the two planets are conjunct in Aquarius, but the conjunction is in the 8th house. So what do we think of when we think of the 8th house? It's very much the house of what is hidden. To me, the 8th house is very much also about the occult. It's about, you know, what's behind the surface of things. And what we see with the discovery of Neptune, on the one hand side, we are seeing, you know, it's the first planet, for example, to be discovered actually by mathematicians, because, you know, because of the orb of Uranus, you know, mathematicians like, you know, Le Verrier and John Couch Adams independently in the UK, you know, they calculated and actually knew that this planet is going to be, you know, kind of X marks the spot. So we have, you know, kind of is quite confliction, kind of quite conflicted as to who had discovered it first, actually, at the time. So that was quite Neptunian. And then we've got, you know, James Chalice, who was famous for his missed opportunity to discover Neptune, because John Couch Adams had actually, also a mathematician, actually told him, hey, this is where it is. So it was quite conflicted things going on at the time. But we see as well Jupiter square, Jupiter in Gemini, which is very, and Mercury in Virgos. There's a strong sense of, the intellect in this chart. But we've got this heavy emphasis on in the discovery chart in a whole complete different area of life and reality. So what we see, for example, around this time in the 1840s, this is where it starts. You start to see the two planets. We get the birth of spiritualism coming through. We see the publication of the Spiritualist Bible, for example. And this whole idea here, it's a kind of metaphysical idea, spiritualism. So it's the idea that there are, that the world is made up of at least two different fundamental substances: matter, which we could say is Saturn, and Neptune, which is very much the spirit, the invisible, the soul, the afterlife. And here we have in 1840s upstate New York, the start of communication with the dead, with deities. There's suddenly mediums appearing who are able to talk, to those who have passed over to the other side. Of course, this was going to be huge because by 1861, when we have the Civil War, Neptune was in Pisces by then. So many young American, soldiers died that all these parents wanted to contact their lost loved ones. Same thing in Britain after the First World War. Spiritualism and the, contact through mediums with, the afterlife took a huge upsurge. So this is a totally different, something that is in complete, shall we say, contradiction to what Saturn is representing. Because we all know that we have Marx and Engels, we have the Communist Manifest being published, and by 1848, all of these revolutions going on throughout Europe. But we also have things like kerosene being discovered. And again, we have the idea of oil, which is fluid, being created from coal, which is very Saturn and Saturn based. And this, this discovery of kerosene, and Gesner's discovery, Gesner himself is seen as the father of the modern petroleum industry, shall we say. We have nitroglycerine coming through, which again, nitroglycerine was a very unstable Saturn-Neptune, 1846, again, this exact year. It was a very powerful chemical explosive, and more powerful than gunpowder. And what it did, it enabled, mining operations, large-scale construction to take place because tunnels could be blasted. But it was a very unstable explosive. I think it was, what's his name? The guy who's named Noble. I think it was Noble who stabilized it, and then we get dynamite as the next stop. But here we also see in 1842, we see the word dinosauria being coined, terrible lizard, because by this point, by 1842, so many dinosaurs and giants, prehistoric evidence of prehistoric life had been discovered, that the whole narrative of the Bible, the whole idea of the world being created in 7 days, for example, it started to become unhinged or unpicked. It didn't stand up. But what we also start to see is in 1846 is the very early stages of women coming together as well, and the early stages of women's suffrage. But it wasn't called feminism. That's much later. It was called womanism at the time, which is, much more family orientated sort of call for more equal rights for women. And as you see, so, Venus is in Virgo in this chart, Moon is in Scorpio. So both the female, what we would say are the planets that represent the feminine in this chart, are in fall. And so, yeah, it's a sort of, but they are sextile to each other. So something of that, new idea that you see through Marx and Engels is definitely coming through, on a much wider stage as well in terms of women's rights. So yeah, this eighth house, something is, if you like, is of a different type of knowledge is coming through and opening up. Certainly through the eighth house, the unconscious begins to enter consciousness, the arrival of the supernatural, spiritualism, the knocking sounds, that's where it began in the Fox family home. We have the work of people like Coleridge, Edgar Allan Poe, the first really American Gothic poet, the paintings of Turner. We see new forms of magic and enchantment. So wonder starts to come back. It's as if the invisible world starts to assume a new form. This idea of, Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth, just as we think we've got it covered. And Saturn in Aquarius, in the discovery chart, we've got it, we've got it sorted now. Neptune comes in and says, oh, no, you haven't. There's much more than you can imagine. So we see by the next conjunction of Saturn-Neptune, we see already the Society of Psychical Research is formed, and the paranormal itself has started to become a new field of academic research and study, and it has remained so ever since. So this is the chart actually for the start of the communication with the devil, because they called the Fox sisters, they were sort of in upstate New York. It was actually at that time quite a small, like a village, not a hamlet, but not like now, not as it is now. And it was, they moved in there into this house, and in the winter they already started to find some kind of activity that was unexplained carrying on in the house. But by March of this 31st of March, they started to realize that if they, for example, knocked 3 times and asked, who they named Mr. Splitfoot after the hoved feet of the devil, they would ask him to, could you, do the same, knock 3 times. And so they started to enter into communication with this entity or being. And it's quite interesting because look at that massive, in the 4th house, it's taking place within their family home. And there's that huge, we've got a big 4th house there with Saturn and Neptune still both in Pisces. This is, tappings going on in their family home. And Mars in the 8th house there square. What we also have is in October 1846, we have the first use of ether in an operation. So prior to this time in India, hypnotism had been used, which is also quite Neptunian, I think, hypnotism. But this is the first, I haven't got a time for this, but it was the first like real operation, public display of how ether worked. And it's that idea of Saturn, Neptune, the softer side of it, taking you away from consciousness, taking you away from pain, taking you into, and it's interesting, I've just noticed this now. So what we're having here as well is a solar eclipse. So this is taking place at the time of the solar eclipse. So consciousness is being taken out of the equation, and people are being offered a pain-free means of having surgery, because before then, I mean, it was a case of bite down on a stick, or get drunk. So sort of Saturn, Neptune, so just a few ideas. Some of this is coming from Liz Green as well. So, but it's an idea of a denial, as in a refusal or inability to see. It's that kind of turning away from reality, which Saturn, Neptune can bring about. The place where Neptune is positioned in our birth chart, or in a country's birth chart, in fact, it's the area where we are most susceptible to denial and self-deception. So similarly, during a long Neptune transit, we might feel we have lost our way or are unable to see where we are going. And in fact, Neptune is just a different way of seeing. It's a different approach to the world that we live in. There can also be, under a strong Neptune transit, a wish to escape reality, a need for rest or deep meditation. And I think it's really important with Saturn Neptune to allow ourselves the space to fantasize and room to imagine, just to use the imagination to see new scenarios for ourselves. Of course, it can be some kind of chaos always where Neptune's involved, or, some kind of ecstasy as well. Because Neptune does have the power to confuse, Saturn. It overwhelms Saturn in the way of a sort of, if we think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example, there's just that flood of people, just taking over the structure. So it's like, who am I really? You can almost hear this little voice of Saturn, help, who am I really? So yeah, it's a kind of a return to the essence, a return to something of the source. And if we use it wisely and constructively, we can bring about a new structure and a new depth to the area of our chart that is being transited. There could be some difficulties and challenges, of course, related to the themes of that house. Maybe some kind of dharma or duty or things that we have to do and that we shouldn't avoid, because that's very Neptunian, let's have another drink. Let's not do that now, But in essence, what we have is this conjunction on the 0 degrees Aries point, the axis of the world. This is a major point of change and breakthrough. So it has the power really to set things in motion, to bring things about. So it's a very powerful reset. And of course, as individuals, we have much more authority, Saturnian authority, and much more able to channel it than when we envision this in a more collective area. So one of the things I started to really strike me about this, so this is Neptune's discovery chart on the inner wheel. And on the outer wheel, we have the secondary progress chart for Neptune. And what is very striking about the secondary progress chart is, as you can see there, the sun has just changed sign in the Neptune discovery chart. So the sun is actually now on the Aries points, and the sun was on the Aries point because the Aries point is 0 degrees of the cardinal sign. So in the birth chart of Neptune, the sun is in 0 degrees Libra. So it's bringing about this very powerful opposition here. But I think more relevant to the whole kind of conjunction that's coming up is that it is falling on the sun, which is a symbol of consciousness and awareness and integration and wholeness. It is falling on the sun in Neptune discovery chart, and it's falling in opposition with the sun in the discovery chart as well. So this chart is powerfully charged in terms of the Neptunian field, if you like. So this change in the position of Neptune, it moving onto the Aries point, happens in January 2025, just shortly before the inauguration of Donald Trump. And certainly we could feel, I think, the change almost immediately, because he started immediately signing all these executive orders, and, the world changed in an instant, really. So, yeah, Saturn and Neptune are also, as I said, transiting in opposition to radix Sun in Libra in the discovery of Neptune chart. So this is a really important polarity there that's coming up. So, yeah, it seems as if this current Saturn-Neptune transit, in my opinion, given its force on the Aries point, it does seem to single out Neptune as being particularly relevant or having a sort of special kind of role or importance. So this is taken from an article that's just come out in the CIA magazine Time Lords, which I wrote about the shifting sands of the Middle East and Neptune's role there in the Middle East. So this is a couple of quotes from there. So the sun is a powerful symbol of conscious integration and identity. So at some level, we are being offered an opportunity to deepen our collective understanding of Neptune's influence. Right now, Neptune appears to be expressing himself primarily through the dissolution and erosion of Saturnian structures, undermining established systems rather than integrating or positively changing them. And we can see this happening everywhere. whether it be in the area of international law, the rules governing the use of force or engagement in war, or quite simply in how a host should treat a guest. I'm thinking here, of course, of that shocking meeting with Zelensky, with Donald Trump and I've forgotten his name, but his vice president. So the whole area of correct civil polite behaviour is sort of, it's being undermined at the moment. And what is also falling by the wayside, it seems, are ancient notions of sanctuary and refuge, because the whole sort of vibe throughout Europe at the moment is, we don't want refugees, we don't want to offer sanctuary, we don't want to have these people, coming in and threatening our way of, whatever. But it's definitely the ancient notions of sanctuary, which have always been there, and sort of dissolving before our eyes. And the principle of civilian protection and the international humanitarian law is just being eroded before our eyes. So we're seeing a heavy dose of chaos rules, really, which is very Neptunian. So this set me thinking about, why is Saturn in fall in Aries? What might this be? And I think there is a fundamental difference between planet and sign, because Saturn seems to not be doing a very good job at this point. The grip and reality in a lot of things is sort of really being, as I said, undermined strongly by Neptune at the moment. I think the fundamental thing is that Aries, is Mars ruled, and it has that, act first, think later, aggressive, independent. It's got a naive quality to it as well. I think, for example, the way Donald Trump deals with Putin, I think it's very naive to think that Vladimir Putin is going to, listen to what he has to say. I mean, it's over. Ego is just, of course he's not going to pay any attention. But it has that kind of youthful energy in general, Aries and Mars. Whereas Saturn is a collective planet, and it's the exact opposite, isn't it? It's bound to time, it's bound to old age, it's about building fundament, it's slowly catchy monkey, planning ahead, winter wisdom, ripeness, pruning. It's the long game. So this Saturn in Aries is not really in a great position to kind of have a sort of long-term vision for things. And it's just a few, kind of thoughts I had in Saturn in Aries, how, it's certainly with Jupiter exalted in Cancer, that, idea of, nationalism, we first, a very defensive kind of energy, really. And quite often we see with Saturn in Aries, the kind of violent deaths that disrupt society, like, the assassination of Martin Luther King or Lee Harvey Oswald, or someone like Timothy McVeigh or Saddam Hussein, or the fatwa, the Bin Laden fatwa. So it's kind of quite a sort of, quite a change in society brought about sometimes through force and through violent acts. So historically, if we look, take a longer view of, what's happening, we have, I'm sure many of you have been reading articles about the upcoming conjunctions. So we know things like when it was in Virgo, for example, the Gutenberg press, it opened up reading and literacy and, changed the world, really. The Bible was printed, so people could, not rely on, other people to tell them. They could actually, have a source that they could, visit themselves. We had the Great Fire of London happened under a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So, the whole London changed dramatically after that fire. Buildings, Capricorn, it's an earth sign. Buildings became, the streets were wider. Buildings were made of stone as opposed to wood. There was a greater awareness of, the kind of dangers when you build, in the way the old London had been built. We have people like Darwin and Abe Lincoln, who were born under the conjunction in Sagittarius, who are born on the same day, in Sagittarius, which, of course, it's a freedom, philosophical freedom to go into areas as Darwin did, like break taboos, and Lincoln, having the courage to, stand up for, a greater good, really. We also had in the 1846, the USA-Mexican War, which actually became a huge land grab for the US. If you look at all of the sort of states that were added to the US, from California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, most of Arizona, Colorado. It was huge. And we see someone like, as I say, Edgar Allan Poe, who was this famous occult author, born under that Sagittarius conjunction as well. And, his he was born, under the conjunction in Sagittarius, which would have been the 1809 conjunction, but the Raven was published in 1845. It's just a look at the chart of Edgar Allan Poe there, who's got as well a really wonderful, conjunction of, it's very resonant, really, in a way, with these Fox sisters, isn't it? That big conjunction there around the fourth house, and Uranus in the North Node in the first. So Capricorn, of course, he's got this Mercury and Cazimi. So he was introducing as well a whole kind of new concept, things like the Raven and the fall of the House of Usher, the macabre. He's kind of quite one of the first Gothic writers, really. So this 36-year cycle, I think we all know the royal family, so it's going to be interesting to see how that conjunction pans out in the UK, because I think it's on the descendant. It falls on the descendant of the UK chart. The UK has Libra rising, of course, in the chart of the country, so the conjunction is on the cusp of the 7th. But I think in general, what happens with Saturn-Neptune is things that have become frozen in time, things that have stopped moving, stopped adapting, stopped growing, what has become crystallized, what is no longer, we could say, serving any kind of purpose. Then you see that Neptune has an ability to find a weak spot in that and bring things to fall. Collapse, we had in the Netherlands under the 52 conjunction in Libra, for example, we had an incredible, horrible dam break, a huge flood across the Netherlands, thousands of people were killed. It seems to find that weak spot, Neptune. It finds that, where's the crack in this, that if we, hit that crack, it's like if a sculptor, sculptors know this, there can be a crack in the stone, and you can be unfortunate if you hit that, you've blown your sculptor, because the whole thing can fall apart. And Neptune has that ability to find a weak spot. So the last conjunction in Aries, by the way, was much further. So this, if you go back even to, 1380, conjunction on the 0 degrees Aries point is extremely, extremely rare. So anyway, in 1703, we had in the UK a mass recruitment of unemployed men to fight in Queen Anne's War in North America, for example. And you have things like a mass suicide of samurais and they all committed harakiri in Japan. But you also had the first fire brigade which is very Aries, and that fiery energy was established in Scotland. And I think, in the last conjunction we had, of course, as well, the Tiananmen Square, among other things. So Liz Green, she says that, Saturn and Neptune coming together, we're looking at major movements which arise from deep within the collective layers of the psyche. So these are real sort of, shifts and changes. But actually, Saturn-Neptune manifests everywhere during the conjunction. We can find it everywhere because they're going to be conjunct for a while. They're conjunct now, it's already manifesting. So just to look at a few less well-known charts, this is the chart for the Hillsborough disaster, for example, and the time I've taken is, the kickoff was at 3 o'clock. And this is where it started to go very badly wrong, because I think they opened a gate, Epping, whatever, they opened a gate and people knew the match had started. So there was this incredible rush down a fifth house, the house of sport, the house of, enjoyment, actually. So what we see with Saturn-Neptune here in this chart in the fifth house, it's creating this absolutely horrendous crush. I think, wasn't it 78 or 86? It was a huge loss of life there. So that's one way, you know, that the Saturn-Neptune manifested itself that's, yeah, we don't look at. And here's another. So this was the opening of the sales of shares in water companies, you know, when water became privatized in the UK. This is the opening of the what do you call it, the market for sale of shares. Was I'm sorry that you can't actually see the date, but I'll put that in the notes under the YouTube film so that you can look at this chart. But isn't that an amazing chart? You know, you've got Jupiter here in Cancer, and it's being like, you know, the big giveaway, you know, the 7th house, it's opening it up to sales, to, and Jan and, you know, everybody could buy shares. Initially, that was the idea. But I mean, it's you know, it's also a full moon here. And we all know how that turned out, you know, for the water. I mean, Saturn is also, of course, a planet, and Neptune to some degree, that can be linked to poison, that can be linked to it can be quite yeah, poisonous, really, Saturn, can't it? Quite deathly or deadly, even, certainly in Capricorn. So there are many ways, that's what I'm trying to say. As we start looking at charts, you know, we can place that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in so many different contexts. But I think it's interesting, in the 20th century, we had, you know, it was 3 times the planets met, and it's the same lineup, you know, we had the conjunctions in Leo, then in Libra, then in Capricorn. And in the 21st century, it will follow that same pattern. It's going to be now in Aries, later it'll be in an air sign, and it'll finish off in Virgo at the end of the 21st century. So I'm taking a different line now, coming to bring something else in. So in their book, Mundane Astrology, you know, Michael Bagent, Nicholas Campion, and Charles Harvey argue that because of its associations with confusion and delusion, Neptune can also rule war. And I'm saying this because we have this conjunction in Aries. And the example they give in the book is fascist Italy, where the main motive for war was national glory, and the main result was confusion. And of course, this is an oft-cited, you know, here, truism. The first victim of war is the truth. So I'm going to read this now, because this is from Liz Green's book on Neptune. And this is taken from page 60, because I noticed with Liz Green, she did that with the fall of the old USSR. When she started to look at Saturn, Neptune, she has this ability sometimes to be quite prophetic. So this is Liz Green talking about Neptune. She says on page 60, she's talking about Neptune's link to the apocalypse. And she says this, talking about the apocalypse, she says this widespread belief in an imminent destruction and transformation of the world has its roots in the ancient prophetical books of the Jews. In these books, we find the image of a new Palestine, which will be nothing less than a new Eden, paradise regained on earth. But before this new Jerusalem is restored to the faithful, there must be a day of wrath when the sun and the moon and the stars are darkened. And I just read this when this film, I'm not sure if I can play it, but I'll try. If you can't hear the text, let me know. But I don't know if any of you saw this.
Melanie?
Sorry.
What's going on?
We're here because we care about
Right.
our women.
Okay.
Bringing the light all the street, no more tunnels, no more fear. Oh God is finally here. Oh God is shining bright, golden future, and new life. Peace and dance the dream is done. Oh God is number one. Oh God is shining bright, golden future, and new life. Peace and dance the dream is done. Oh Gaza, number one.
We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
So I don't know if any of you saw that, but it seemed to me, having just read this text by Liz Green about this new vision that she seems to be bringing through this apocalypse. I just thought this seemed to tie in very strongly to what's going on in the Middle East. And we know that the Middle East resonates very strongly with the Saturn-Neptune cycle. So in the First World War, for example, under the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Leo, it was the fall of Jerusalem. We have the Balfour Agreements. And what we also had under the last conjunction was the death of the Ayatollah Khomeini, for example, in Iran. So, and the whole chaotic scenes around the funeral of the Ayatollah Khomeini was all happening under that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn as well. So again, this is a little something from that article, which is in Time Lords. It's just come out. So what I'm sensing as well a bit is that with the all Aries energy and Neptune has a strong fundamental connection to film. You know, when Neptune was discovered, we had the first dark eras, we had this whole slow development thereafter of film as a medium, and it's a very powerful medium. But I think what we're seeing now with Neptune in Aries is that war has become a sort of spectacle, a theatre in a way. And even though we are watching it from a safe distance, there's something about the brutality of it all, which leaves a sense of menace. And at times also there's a very Mars anger, I think a lot of people are feeling. And this whole idea as well of AI, it's kind of running away with us. So there's the line between truth and reality now has never been more tenuous, I think. And so I think there's this, you know, that all of us under this upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction and Neptune strip journey through Aries, we have to be really aware of fake news, false flags, lies, damn lies, and statistics, because I think it's a time, because Neptune is so very powerful in all of this, that we really have to be more on our guard for things. Because I think Neptune is the dominant energy here, and Neptune, because it rules film, you know, the whole idea of propaganda and fake news, I think that brings that to the foreground in a way. I think artificial intelligence in general is incredibly Neptunian. I think AI is omnipotent, you know, it's all present. We don't need God, really, you know. This new, I've got a bit Dutch in there, see? It's everywhere, you know, it's a manifestation of this new divine, if you like. It's superhuman, you know, you can ask it anything. It's never going to get tired. It's never going to get fed up of answering your question. It's everywhere. So I guess, you know, thinking again of Saturn's position in Aries and, you know, in fall, you know, the question is, where is our sense of reality? Where does authority lie in all of this? You know, so where is the real? Where is Saturn? So I think the positive of Aries, I think, is the idea of a wake-up call, you know, and I think we're already starting to see some kickback on AI, on ChatGPT. You know, there's big discussions going on in schools, certainly in the Netherlands, on how, you know, we can offer tools to children, but still keep them engaged and still keep them using their own brain and, you know, thinking for themselves, because that's the risk if you hand over thought to a machine. You know, it's almost as if the brain becomes, you know, dormant or no longer a, you know, it's almost like, you know, in evolution, we might just, you know, regress to something else if we stop using our brain, if we're not able to think for ourselves. And I think what we are seeing, as I said, I think at the moment, when post-World War I, you know, we saw the whole shape of Europe change. Post, you know, World War II, you know, we also saw, you know, the creation of a new state, Israel being created, you know, and you know, the last conjunction, we saw the fall of the wall. So I think the what we're seeing at the moment, certainly in the dynamic situation, this is something I go into much more detail, obviously, in the article, is the ways in which the whole shape of the Middle East is actually now changing before our very eyes, with Israel coming through as the most dominant power in the region, actually, you know, through its use of high-tech warfare. You know, it's become a regional superpower, really. But the one question, I think, the very Saturnian question that's being asked, really, and it never gets answered, is, hey, you know, what is the end game? You know, what do we want out of this? Where is it heading? What's the real vision for the future here, apart from, you know, a sort of Riviera, you know, on the ruins of Gaza? You know, it's really, no one seems to have an answer to that, or is even attempting to answer that, really. So it's like the blind leading the blind. And so it's very, very strongly Neptunian, I think. So this is the next conjunction, which I think it's worth having a little look at, really. It's a great quote there by Rob Hand, who says, you know, Saturn is the illusion that there is such a thing as reality, you know. What is reality, guys? What is it? Whereas Neptune is the certainty that there is not, you know. So we have this, just, you know, points, you know, like, I mean, it hasn't happened yet. So, you know, we're moving towards this. But this conjunction is exact, and it's actually coming on the back of a solar eclipse. Just a few days prior, there's been a solar eclipse here. The moon was here. It's actually late Aquarius, very late Aquarius, so square Uranus. So Mars is picking up on that solar eclipse that's taken place, I think, 2 days or 3 days prior. So in late Aquarius. So, you know, very strong, because Mars is ruling the conjunction. So it's Mars square Uranus, and there's a very strong, I should say as well, mutual reception there between Mars and Saturn. They're in each other's sign. So, you know, but Mars is square in Uranus, which always has a sort of danger quality to it. I always think, and I mean, it can be on, again, you know, it can manifest on many levels. It can manifest, for example, in the form of earthquakes, or, you know, sort of natural disasters of some kind. But also, you know, if we look at Venus, interestingly, Venus is in Pisces in this chart, and Jupiter's in Cancer, you know, exalting the moon. So, you know, and Venus is trine Jupiter. So I'm thinking in terms of the feminine energy, if we think of like Neptune discovery, where the female planets are quite, you know, ill-positioned, you could say. You know, there's a sense here of, you know, women, if we think about, for example, some of the new laws that are being forced upon women in the US, certainly around abortion and things like that. You can feel this powerful female energy coming through, and a certain militancy with Mars square Uranus. There's quite a lot of fight in Mars square Uranus. And of course, the Saturn-Neptune, a sextile Pluto, which, you know, again, the theme of those, the combination of, you know, Saturn-Pluto, Neptune-Pluto, it's the first contact between Saturn-Pluto as well since the COVID epidemic, so since that conjunction back in 2020. So it's kind of, again, it is that theme of destroying the old, what's left, you know, what can we rebuild? How can we rebuild? It's a bit of a slow burn, really, in some ways, maybe, but it's also, again, this is set for Jerusalem. I think as well, it's very much about consolidating power and, you know, tightening the grip and, you know, a stronger hold. So I do feel, you know, it's a kind of a conjunction. This upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction offers potential for breakthrough, but I think it is definitely because of the position and the role that Saturn is playing. I mean, here, as I say, you know, it's in fall. I do think that we have to keep our wits about us and, you know, kind of, I don't think that we can turn our back on AI. It's there, and it is a tool, and it can be very useful. I recently used ChatGPT, for example, to help myself, because I had quite a lot of work and I just felt a bit overwhelmed. And so I just asked it, can you help me create a, you know, schedule here so that I can, pull all of this off. And it did a really good job. I didn't follow it to the letter. I mean, you've got to, be involved. It's not like I wouldn't hand it over. But I was very interested, and my son has used it for decorating his house. Where's the best place to position X, Y, and Z in his new house. So it's a tool. But again, I think given the thin line that Neptune creates between reality and the weakness of Saturn, I think we really have to, beware of damn lies and statistics and fake news, and, really question. And, before we take something as a truism or think that it's true, we need to double check it and make sure that the source is correct, that we are on the right track with it, that we're not being, led a merry dance, or like Charlie Chaplin in the Hall of Mirrors. We've taken the bite and suddenly we're in this, where am I sort of thing. So this is the CIA. So this is my article there, The Shifting Sands of the Middle East, in which I take a much closer look at the conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune in the Middle East, or certainly throughout the 20th century, and look ahead. And I think, Alison, I think I would say that I'm on track, and I would like to leave it there and see what people have for feedback and if there are any questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. So just if you want to stop sharing, and that would be great. Thank you very much. I thought that was an absolutely amazing talk.